Hey baddies! Welcome to this episode of Called to Be Bad and happy Pride Month. In today's episode, I talk with Jenna Reyanne Martin, whose pronouns are she, her. Jenna is a trans woman who has made her home in Goshen, Indiana, where she is an enthusiastic member of the queer community, a parent, a home construction worker, and a musician. Jenna's home congregation is Faith Mennonite Church, where I happen to be pastor. In today's episode, we hear Jenna's story of what it was like coming out as trans and how that coming out changed her life. We also talk about how being trans/queer disrupts social scripts. She also gives advice for churches who would like to be more inclusive. And if you stay to the very end, you get to hear Jenna recite the Called to Be Bad intro by memory. Also, apologies for those of you who are watching on YouTube and notice some audio and video lineup issues. We were having some technical difficulties and I had to record on my phone. So that is what accounts for the kind of smaller video, and sometimes the audio and video don't match up. But, it is what it is. So I hope you enjoy.
While I was processing my gender, my biggest fear was that I would come out as trans and then be like, oh, wait, actually, no.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, Mariah.
Welcome to Called to Be Bad.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Even from before you asked me, it was a fantasy.
A fantasy realized. Yeah, that's great. Welcome, Jenna. And so today we are going to hear your story of being trans and being in the church and the relationship between the two. But first, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking ginger ale because I have lingering nausea symptoms from a traumatic brain injury. And this mug says, "Ask me about my pronouns." And this was a gift from the first person that I came out to as trans in real life. And the words are in a rainbowy font, as is my background is a pride flag.
Both are excellent. I love them. And I also love ginger ale and ginger beer. Nick and I have learned that that's like our favorite summer drink, like to get the really strong ginger ale or ginger beer and have it with like ice and sit on the front porch. It's very nice.
I would like to try that sometime.
I'll have you over for some ginger beer on my porch. And I want to show off my little, what's it called?
French
It's
press?
a mini French press. For some reason, the words that popped into my head were like personal pan pizza, because I was trying to think of like an individual, it's a tiny little French press, and it's really cute. And I made decaf coffee because it's
It
the
is very
afternoon.
cute.
Isn't it cute? I should have brought my regular one for scale, but like it's small, it's tiny, it's cute. And so I'm going to have that, and I'm going to pour it out, have an ASMR moment here of me pouring my coffee. Sure. And my mug today, it doesn't really have to do with our topic, but I thought you would like it. And it says, "I'm nuts about coffee," and it has a squirrel that's holding a nut, and it's cute. um Anyways, okay, so I would love to hear, Jenna, your story of your relationship with your gender, um what it was like growing up when you kind of realized that you were trans, when you came out as trans, that kind of. And I know that's a big ask and it's a lot of questions. And as you talked on your Trans Day of Remembrance, like, it is no small thing to share this story and feel, I don't know, would you say you feel safe doing it? I mean, it's still a vulnerable thing. Um, but yeah, just acknowledging that it's.
I mean, yeah, basically, I share in audiences that I trust, and an audience that's going to follow a Christian podcast that's titled Called to Be Bad is probably made up of people that I'm going to trust. So, yeah.
Good. I also would like to think so. Um, my our the Called to Be Bad Instagram, a video got picked up by the wrong side of Instagram, and so it's all these people telling me that I'm not a real pastor because I'm a woman. And someone commented under one of the videos, and they were like, "Don't you think it's kind of suspicious that on every like traditional element of Christianity, you're like debunking it or going against the grain or something?" And I was like, yeah, it's almost as if that's the entire point of the platform. Very strange, very strange. um
Yeah.
Anyways, okay, so yeah, what's a good place to start? When was kind of your earliest memory of gender? And yeah, I liked the story that you told in your Trans Day of Remembrance speech. So but you don't have to tell that one. But I liked it, so that's kind of where this question comes from.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to start in the middle of the story
Sure.
because there's a really notable um, event about 10 or 11 years ago. A woman at my church came out as trans. I was going to Assembly Mennonite Church at that time. And that, like, I knew that being trans was like a thing that existed, but it never was really personal to me until she came out and she was sharing about her experience. And I was like, oh my goodness, I think I might be trans. So that was like a hugely important turning point. Um, and then everything since then and before then has sort of like related to that realization and like coming to terms with it. Um, because I didn't come out like really like, yes, I'm absolutely trans
Mm-hmm.
until like 2 years ago. So it's fairly new for me. And then I'm sort of like retrospectively looking at everything. So now let me go back
Mm-hmm.
to that story that you were referring to. When I was in sixth grade, I was at a school dance, and this was like, I think, the same format that most people are familiar with, where like all the male presenting people like hang out and uh, ask the female presenting people to dance, and then like for one song they dance together, and then like shuffle around to different people. So like this was what I was anticipating, and um, it was my first experience like that. And I remember I was hanging out with one of my friends who was male presenting, and it just sort of popped into my head, and I said, I sometimes wish that I was a girl. And it was kind of a revelation to me, but
Mm.
also didn't feel like it was like a really big thing or like a subversive thing. It was just like, oh, here's a thought that's popped into my head. And it was absolutely 100% true. It wasn't just like an idle wondering. And then he kind of looked at me weird and was like, okay, that's strange. And so then I kind of learned, oh, I guess that's something that you're not really supposed to say. And I don't know. So when when I started learning more about trans people 10 years ago, at that time it was sort of popular to say like, I always knew I was trans, and like, here's proof, like, I can go back to my childhood, blah, 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 like, look at all these things, which is not necessarily the um, most woke philosophy that I've learned since then. But at some point during my process, I was like, okay, it's important for me to like re-examine these memories and sort of see like, can I like prove that I've always been trans? And I looked at how in high school I would like wear nail polish sometimes, and I was like really adamant that I had to grow my hair long. Um, and I really got along well with all my women friends and didn't really feel like I was on the same wavelength as the friends who were male presenting. Um, College was kind of similar to that, and then I also started experimenting a little bit with feminine presenting clothing. But throughout all that time, like, it never really occurred to me, like, oh, this is something meaningful about my gender, or that it was something subversive. It was just, this is something that I like, so I'm going to do it because I don't really, I was kind of naive and didn't really think about what other people would think or care really what other people would think. Uh, yeah, so that was kind of like my childhood experience of like things related to that now in retrospect I can say, yeah, I think that's related to me coming out as trans as an adult. Then there was kind of a chunk of like 10 years when like my primary goal was like to get married, and I was sexually attracted to women, so there was never a question in my mind that I, as a male presenting person, would marry a woman and that we would, you know, go through life as a heterosexual couple. So I did that for like 10 years and it was fine. I didn't really think much about gender, although I always kind of knew in the back of my mind that like there was gender nonconformity in me. I also kind of knew that there was like bisexuality in me, but I was like, okay, well, I'm married and marriage has to be monogamous forever. So, like, it doesn't matter those things. So, at this 10 years ago mark was also about the time that we started having children. And then things started to get less tidy in my mind about like my life and my relationship to all these things. Um, so I sort of like experimented a little bit um, with more feminine clothing, and I sort of like quasi came out to a few people, including my spouse. Um, and that did not go well at all. And it was just like, oh, this is going to be a huge disruption and it's going to be terrible for everyone, and I just better not do this. So I went back in the closet voluntarily, which was difficult to do, but even more difficult to stay there. And it became more and more difficult as time went on. Um, like by this time, I knew that I was not a heterosexual male, which was what I was pretending to be. And I knew that I was unhappy, but I didn't really think that there was anything I could do about it. So I just tried to deal as best I could. And I was kind of out to myself in private sometimes. Um, but any time that I wasn't like urgently feeling the need to present as feminine, then I just ignored that part of my life and tried to be busy with, you know, being a good spouse and being a good parent and being a productive member of society and all that stuff that I felt like I was supposed to do. Um, and going to church because I felt like that was what I was supposed to do, and I liked the community and I liked the music. And so, yeah, very much just going through the motions. And then there is this huge disruption in everyone's life called COVID, which for me, made me realize, like, oh my goodness, my life is half over and I cannot keep trying to live it like this. This is just not going to work. So I was like needing to figure out how to proceed, how to deal with the consequences of proceeding. Um, Luckily, I had um, the resources at that time to do a lot of therapy. So I actually, like, by myself and some with my spouse, worked with like 4 different therapists over a period of about a year. And my primary question, which I see now is like very weighted, was, am I really trans or am I somehow confused? And I super cringe now that that was my attitude, but it absolutely was. Like, I literally had a list of like things that I was like, well, maybe I'm not really trans. Maybe I just like feminine clothing. Or like, maybe I'm not really trans. Maybe I just don't like toxic masculinity. And so, with primarily with my therapist at Mosaic Health and Healing Arts, I basically went through that entire list and one by one like crossed off all the things like, nope, that's not a reason that I think I'm trans. That's not a reason. And ultimately in January of 2022, I was like, okay, you know what? I really am trans. And I'm not confused, and this is going to be my life.
Yeah. It reminds me of not to confuse gender and sexuality, but it reminds me of what I've heard from some people who are realizing that they are gay or bi or queer, and feeling like they need to this desire to be gay enough, like that, like there is some rubric, and if you get all the checks right, then you're kind of in. Then you feel like, and it makes sense to me because, like you were saying, like if this is going to turn over your life, it it's understandable to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is this true? Because what happens if you turn your life upside down and you realize you've made a mistake? What then?
Yeah.
Um,
So it was
and and oh, go ahead.
really helpful to have people to talk to who knew about queer issues. Like,
Mm,
I didn't realize how important that would be until I started to unpack those things. Like, my therapist kept saying, this list is ridiculous. Like, if you feel like you're trans, then you're
mm,
trans. And I was like, but I don't know.
mm,
But in the end, I think that they were right. And I needed to trust my feelings. And I mean, I think it was valuable for me to check off my list and, go through a logical process. Um, but ultimately, it just came down to like, this feels right. Um,
mm-hmm,
and luckily, I guess for me, it was, I felt trans in like a kind of in a binary sense. So it was, coming from a cisgender heterosexual background, it was easy for me to imagine like what it might be like to be a woman, rather than like if I was
mm,
non-binary or something where I didn't know anything about those sorts of identities, until I started like this exploration process. And I feel like that would have been
mm-hmm,
more difficult for me. But yeah, so
mm,
I've been socially presenting as a woman for like almost 2 years now, and I've never for a moment felt like it's not the right thing for me. Now, my therapist said you're allowed to
Mm,
change over time. So I'm like, okay, maybe at some point things will
mm-hmm,
change. But for now, I feel so much better going through life dressed this way and acting and talking in a more feminine way. And yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, wasn't it Demi Lovato who came out as non-binary, and then later, I believe, I mean, I should check, but later said no, I feel comfortable with um, she her pronouns, and like I just can't imagine like it would be hard enough to be an ordinary person to kind of go through this exploration sounds trite, but like to yeah, just I don't know what's a better word. Yeah, these learning is about yourself, and then to have it to be on the platform of like a celebrity where there's so much uh critique, and I'm trying to prop you up. There we go, that might work. Um anyways, I don't know what I'm saying there.
I think I know what you're saying because while while I was
Okay.
processing my gender, my biggest fear was that I would come out as trans and then be like, oh, wait, actually, no. And then, like, all the consequences of me coming out as trans would be like, oh, like, why did I have to do that? Um, which, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, we're kind of talking around it, but like, I'm okay with saying the consequences of me coming out as trans were that I had to switch careers because I didn't feel comfortable where I was. And I got divorced from my spouse of 17 years because um, we didn't want to, we were not comfortable with the way that our marriage would have changed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, it was a huge disruption in my life. And my biggest fear was that I would do that and then be like, oh, it wasn't really worth it. Um, but it absolutely has been worth it.
Mm.
Can I tell you about some of the
Yeah.
amazing things that I've discovered?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So, I think the first one I discovered was that my resistance to um, joining the church as like an official member faded away.
Mm.
I realize in retrospect, like all of my reluctance had been from like religious trauma that I hadn't processed,
Mm.
religious trauma to do with gender and sexuality, and like just feeling like I wasn't like lining up and that I wasn't like the right kind of person. And so I was like, I'm not gonna commit to anything that has been this out of out of sync or like dangerous feeling for my whole life. But I came out as trans and that went away.
Mm.
Um, and then I was I was not particularly happy to be a parent when I was male presenting, but when I came out as trans, when I like allowed myself to have that freedom, I felt a lot better about being a parent. And I was like, oh, there's been stuff like blocking me from loving my children. And a lot of that stuff was gender dysphoria. Um,
Mm.
yeah, my therapist kept telling me, like, if you're your authentic self, your ability to like be a like fully human person is just going to be so much better. And I was skeptical, but they were absolutely right. Um, I
Mm.
I'm more in touch with my emotions. Um, I am happier. I discovered that I have like smiling dimples that I never knew before because I just didn't have that deep joy.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And it I mean there's so many thoughts going through my head about kind of what you're saying, like toxic masculinity and the relationship between that and gender dysphoria and yeah, the biological and social realities. Anyways, it's all coming together in my head. So you were saying you were reluctant to become a member at your church because of your religious trauma related to gender. Um, was there more that you wanted to say about like what has happened since coming out, or do you want to talk some about your relationship with
Yeah,
the
sure.
church? Or
So
okay.
like I said before, I went to Assembly Mennonite Church for a long time, and it was a really good community, and they were working pretty hard to like be on the right side of history in terms of LGBTQ plus issues. So like I knew that like theoretically it would be fine for me to come out there, and I did, and it was fine. Like everyone was totally like, "Oh, okay, Jenna, she, her, great." So then I started conversations with some of the pastors about like, oh, hey, you know what? I kind of feel like joining this church, and they were like, okay, great, let's work towards that. And as I worked and processed through like a little bit of my church experience, I sort of felt like I'm not sure if like this is the best place for me anymore. Like, I mean, lots of things are changing in my life. Like, I guess, is it okay if my church experience changes as well? And I was
Hmm.
writing a sermon, or technically a storytelling, about my experience. And as I was working through 15 drafts of that 3,000 word document, I was doing a lot of thinking and a lot of paying attention to my feelings. At the same time, I started listening to this podcast, which was really inspiring. And I also was getting to know one of the other faith pastors' husbands, who was a really emotionally mature and cool person. And through these experiences, I was like, I think I need to check out this Faith Mennonite Church. And I did, and just immediately felt this um, hard to put in words because it wasn't an intellectual thing. It was a feeling. So,
Hmm.
uh, what the way I finally put it in words was assembly was always really good at feeding me intellectually and inspiring me, but Faith Mennonite Church really connected with my heart and soul and made me feel good about being in church. And so
Hmm.
over the next couple of months, I gradually transitioned from being an assemblyite to being a faith person.
So this is full transparency. Ha, transparency. This is one long ploy to get everyone to come to Faith Mennonite Church. No, I'm just kidding. Um, no, but yeah, you said it's hard to put into words, but like, and I know that our church is working on um being a place of belonging rather than inclusion. And I've mentioned it before on the podcast about how that feels like a different posture. Inclusion is like, I am making space for you, and it's so nice of me to make this space for you. Rather than belonging is like, it's more um, mutual. We all belong to one another. No one's making space for anyone because there is just space. And so I'm wondering um, if we can talk about what are those intangibles, like what kind of shifts um, need to happen in the broader church so that more trans people, more queer people feel this sense of belonging rather than inclusion.
Mm.
And if we don't want to go there, just say that, and I'll
No, that sounds
say other
interesting. I'll
things.
give it a shot. But also, disclaimer,
Okay.
I'm not a theologian like Father Shannon T.L. Kearns, so I'm not going to have the same level of theological depth that he has. Okay, what was the question? No, about
Like
belonging.
yeah.
So one thing is that accepting trans and queer people as full members of the church is like has to be a starting point. Like that's like the base level. And if there's any hint of we're still trying to figure out if this is the right thing to do, then it can't be belonging, because then it's like you were saying with inclusion. It's like, oh, we have our perfect traditional Mennonite church here, and we're going to open it up to allow these differently sexual and differently gendered people to join us. So, yeah, I mean, there may have been a sort of a coincidence of like me having a fresh start by changing churches and maybe like less baggage with past relationships. But still, for the church to truly have people belong, there has to be no hint of the attitude that they don't belong.
Mm-hmm.
If there are people in the Mennonite Church who still have stuff to process about how they feel about queer identities, that's okay, but just keep that processing away from me, because if I see it, I'll know that you're still not sure if I'm as perfect or as valuable a human being. And that is emotionally difficult for one thing, but also makes it hard to feel like you belong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you were talking, I was putting together something that I haven't before, and like I wanted to get into this conversation with you. What is something that trans people bring to the church and kind of help transform? And we're speaking out of the Mennonite Church, but I think this could apply more broadly, because like as we talked about with in Shannon's episode, uh, there are so many gifts, and if we could move past this conversation of like in or out, then I think there's a much richer, there's more room for growth. And I think one element that you're bringing up is giving people space and giving communities space to change, to say, we are constantly evolving and growing, no matter who you are, no matter what your um, gender identity or sexual orientation. Like, can we give people space to grow and learn and change? Or because of just the chaos of the world, like, do we need people to stay the same so that our brains can be happy and feel safe? Um, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the metaphor that I used to ponder those issues in the last few years was scripts. So
Mm.
from college through like having kids, I followed a very traditional cisgender heterosexual script. And what I realized is I was way too uh, wedded to that script, and I didn't have to be. So I think that's
Mm.
something that trans and queer people can inspire others to realize, that you are allowed to write your own script, or like edit your own script in a way that works for you. again, marrying someone of a different gender and having children should not be an automatic starting point. The starting point should be you are a valuable human being and humans exist in community. How do you want to be connected to your community, and what level of relationships do you want to have with different people as you move through your life? That should be the starting point. And trans and queer people are constantly disrupting existing scripts by the way that we're existing, and I hope that that can be inspiring to young people in particular, but also to older people who maybe haven't thought about different ways of living.
Yeah. My brain is going like neuroscience here and thinking about how our brains form neural pathways, and uh, our brains like to be efficient, so we like what is familiar. We like habits because then our brain doesn't have to work hard thinking and making different decisions.
Yeah.
And essentially, what you are proposing and bringing to the table is allowing churches to rewire, well, churches, people, communities, the world, to rewire pathways to um, yeah, make space for different associations. I didn't connect that to like neuroscience before. Um,
So another way that I thought of that this connects with society more broadly is in terms of like the social role of reproduction. So I grew up on a small family farm, which the tradition there is like there's a heterosexual couple and they have a bunch of kids who then work on the farm, and like it's like this social structure but also an economic structure. And so that's part of the reason why um, there's often been large families in like the Mennonite farming culture, which is my uh, social history. And if people are not getting married to procreate, or if people are disrupting gender, then that messes with that system. And yeah, that can be disruptive and maybe even feel threatening to some people, but there's no reason that it needs to. There are lots of different ways that people can have special relationships other than heterosexual marriage, and there are lots of probably better reasons to have children or not have children than so that they can work on your farm. And then this concept, I think, can broaden even farther to um, the idea of military conscription. Like, there's so many points in history where people are having babies so that they can be soldiers, so that they can fight and protect and or even like take over other people's land and that sort of thing. And I think that queerness has always been really threatening to that system, and that's part of the reason why it's been um, why European social history has tried to repress queer identities, is because it messes with that system. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the European culture that colonized like the entire world is one of the most transphobic and queerphobic cultures in history.
so when people are trying to be rude and try to insult you. They need to be more creative and be like, your queerness is just really anti-capitalist and like trying to like destroy our economic systems. And you'd be like, yes, I am. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Nice to feel seen.
Yeah. Yeah. You see me, you get me. Yeah, so queerness, transness, it upsets hierarchies of relationship and importance. It upsets this idea that your goal in life is to find a partner of the opposite gender and have lots and lots of babies so they can tend to your farm, and also can go to the war and fight for your country and probably play football somewhere in there, and and yeah, and also probably like evangelize in there somewhere too, so that we can all go to heaven.
My cat is climbing on the computer.
She says, I want to be part of the conversation.
Come sit on my lap, kitty.
We never actually did definitions. Is there anything that you want to say there about like how you define being trans, or like you use the phrase gender nonconformity? Is there any? Oh, there's a kitty. I saw a kitty. Is there any definition work that you want to do, or what do you think?
And what I wanted to say about that was being trans or being queer is basically anything that disrupts those systems that I was just talking about.
Yeah.
Anything that does it, obviously, through like gender and sexuality.
And I think like this also gets back to what I was telling you about people coming onto the Instagram and being like, isn't it suspicious how you're going about and debunking or essentially shitting on all of the traditional elements of Christianity? And I'm like, yes, that is it. We are disrupting these pillars that have held up traditional Christianity, our society, because those scripts, if you will, to go back to that language, are not serving everyone. They are serving an elite few at the expense of the many. And
yeah, absolutely. The
if we can flip,
organized Christianity has been serving colonialism and white supremacy and patriarchy. So that's why it needs to be disrupted, because those things are not serving most of us.
And they're not supposed to be. I mean, like some people might argue and pull out Romans or whatever, but like I guess what I'm trying to say is like this is not like this is happening throughout the Bible. There is this bumping up against systems of harm throughout Scripture. Like Cedar said in our first episode about being trans non-binary, Cedar said trans people have always existed. Whatever. The Bible is queer, Christianity is queer. That's, I guess, what I was trying to say. What advice, Jenna, what advice would you have for anyone that is existing within a Christian community or church community and is wanting to live into their fullest humanity and wanting to come out as trans? That's one element of the question. And then another element is maybe like advice for churches who are trying to create a culture of belonging rather than an inclusion. But we can start with like an individual who is like, I'm realizing that I'm trans. I want to come out. Are there like best practices for coming out?
Oh my goodness.
It's a really weird thing to say. I'm sorry.
So I don't think I can answer that question without explaining that, like, I was able to come out fairly seamlessly and successfully, partly because I had followed a traditional script for so long. So I had built up a really. Sorry, my cat just stole my watch and is walking across the room with it. I wasn't wearing
She's
it.
like, all right, time's up. I require attention. Sorry.
Okay,
Continue.
so I was able to come out so successfully without, being on the street or being a target of harassment, partly because I'd spent a long time following traditional scripts and I'd built up a really strong social support system and a strong financial base, both of which are things that are often challenging for queer and trans people. So I don't recommend living for 17 years in a marriage that doesn't feel right. I don't recommend coasting through 20 years of church participation and not feeling like you really belong. I did those things and it was okay for me. I'm happy with where I am now, but yeah, don't do it like that. I don't know. I think it's up to us who are comfortable in our place in society to make space so that young people feel like they can be their authentic selves and don't have to mask and pretend for decades. So, yeah, I think my advice for queer people is protect yourself and do what you have to, or don't do anything that makes you unsafe. The real message has to be for the rest of us. How do we make the world a better place? How do we make Christianity and the Mennonite Church a better place so that those children can be their full selves, so that they can bring their full humanity to our church?
And would it be true to say it wasn't that like at your church, your previous church, you didn't feel like you fully belonged, but it was a time it was, or maybe you did. It's not like that your church did something wrong. It was like time for a change, right? Or I'm worried about assembly people listening to this and being like, wait, what? What did we do?
No. So Assembly didn't do anything wrong. No church can be everything for all people. Assembly was a good place for me when I was presenting as a cisgender male and when I was sort of out of touch with my feelings and I appreciated a very intellectual church community. Assembly was perfect for me. I was happy there. I changed a lot and then I wasn't on the same wavelength in the same way. And so it was me who needed a church like Faith to feed my heart and soul at that point. I know there are many people who are still perfectly happy at Assembly. It's an enormous church, and they have high powered intellectual sermons every Sunday. That's great. It's not for me right now.
Yeah. And again, that points back to like people change and people's needs change, and so it's not like some churches are like better at doing belonging than others necessarily. It's just that different churches and different communities fit different needs. But is there any piece of advice that you would give to churches that would encourage them in their desire to be a place of belonging?
Yeah, I think advice that I would give for churches trying to help people belong is to pay attention and don't make assumptions. There were a lot of gender non-conforming things ways that I presented when I was at assembly, and there could have been opportunities for people to ask me about that or proactively offer counseling. Um, I don't expect that that should necessarily be part of a church's mission. I'm not saying, like, oh my goodness, they didn't do that and I'm so offended. But it could be something that a church could prioritize. Um, there's also the thing that everyone keeps saying, which is read trans authors and listen to music by queer people and all those sorts of things. Um, if the church historically has not been welcoming to queer and trans people, then clearly they need to change their inputs because they're not getting there hasn't been motivation to change in the past, so let's do things differently. So if you're always singing songs by white males, then explore different songs. And if you're always doing readings by certain people, then look for other readings.
Yeah, diversify where you are getting your information and inspiration from.
Yeah. I'm also a big believer in having goals to work towards. Not necessarily like, this is exactly what we need to do and how to get there, but just constantly having, as we do, the idea that we want to be more belonging, or we want to be more inclusive, we want to be more open minded, is a good way to orient yourself as you make decisions as church leaders and committee people.
Yeah. So have some sort of a vision or a goal that you're trying to
Exactly.
live out. Yeah. Well, thanks, Jenna, for telling your story. We hit the hour mark here. Is there anything that you want to touch on that we didn't cover?
I don't think so. This has been
Okay.
really great. And I'm so glad that you're doing this and paying attention to my voice.
Of course.
It really feels like it makes me feel really valuable that people want to hear what I have to say. And I'm trying to use that power responsibly.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I do think it is a true gift to kind of bear witness to stories that open your eyes to new ways of living and I don't know, walking this earth, I guess, if you will. But yeah, I'm grateful for your story and for that little voice inside of your head that was like, man, wish I could be a girl. I wish I could, what would it be like to I don't know. I'm just picturing little Jenna in that awkward room dancing middle schoolers. Anyways, um well, it's tradition on the podcast to end with a blessing. So would it be okay, Jenna, if I blessed you and all of our baddies out there?
I would love it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I've realized I've been playing with this little like bunny that Rachel Stolpe made me. She's my journey mentee and a fan of the podcast. So I'll just hold the bunny also for this blessing. Jenna and your kitty cat and all of you baddies out there, may you go from this episode with the courage to upset hierarchies and capitalism and all of these pillars of our world that do not benefit everyone, that promote harm and exclusion and extortion, etc. May you recognize that you always have permission to change and evolve and grow. And it's okay if you realize you've messed up and have made a mistake. You don't have to prove to anyone that you are gay enough or queer enough or trans enough. You are enough as you are. Amen. Oh, there's a kitty! Can I see the kitty's face? Oh, there's the kitty's face.
This is actually a different cat than the one that's been wandering around during the episode. When I started to get still during your blessing, then
yeah,
this one decided it was time to come over.
Oh, for a little kitty cameo. This is why this is why we also have the podcast on YouTube, so that people can see cool mugs and pets and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly for my mom, because she likes watching the video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Jenna, thanks for coming on and for doing this. Hopefully it did feel like it was just you and I having coffee by the time we actually got around and recorded this thing.
I felt comfortable, so we achieved that.
Good.
Can I try doing the intro again?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can remember it.
Oh, the whole podcast. Yeah, go for it.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dive into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, the kind of stuff that makes good church folk squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hi, Mariah. Welcome to Called to Be Bad.
Hi, Jenna. Thanks. It's lovely being here. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. It'd be really funny if I did a voiceover in the beginning, and so it's like me talking, but it's like actually Jenna in the background. That's amazing. That reminds me of my sister and I. We would watch Phineas and Ferb when we were younger, and we had the whole intro song memorized. There's 104 days of summer vacation. School comes around, just end it. Anyways, I can do almost all of it now still. Anyways. That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.